Madam Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. I would also like to welcome you in The Hague, a city we refer as legal capital of the world. I'm sure that the mayor likes this reference, and as she already said, there are a number of important institutions here. It is, of course, a fitting venue for your important work over the next week on the subject of crime and punishment. In my remarks this afternoon, I want to put a challenge before you for discussion. It is something I have confronted in my work over the past years as an international prosecutor. And it is something that we need, the bright young mind of the future, such as yours, to think creatively about in the years to come. The issue I'm speaking about is a challenge of reconciling the objectives of peace and justice in conflict zones or countries in transition. We generally think about justice as a non-negotiable objective. The majority of you are coming from countries where notions of justice are entrenched in your communities, and anyone who commits a crime can expect to be punished. We have police services and court systems equipped to make sure there is no impunity for crimes. And public opinion acts as a strong incentive for governments to ensure justice for victims. But when we move out of the context of peacetime justice issues and into the arena of crimes committed during armed conflict, the situation becomes much more complex. When a country has been through a violent conflict and has experienced mass atrocities over a long period, it is understandable that ending the conflict and establishing peace is foremost in everybody's mind. The problem is that those same people at the negotiating table are very often the ones who are responsible for committing terrible crimes during the war. It is a paradox that the people driving the war and all its brutalities are the only ones who have the power to stop it. How can we get them to agree on peace and at the same time stay true to our objective of ensuring that they are punished for their crimes? While in the abstract I am sure we can all agree that both peace and justice are essential, in practice there is a tension between the two that we see played out every day. The situation in Sudan is a case in point. As you know, the International Criminal Court, also here in The Hague, has issued a number of arrest warrants for crimes against humanity and genocide against a number of state officials in Sudan. Although indicted, these officials are still key interlocutors in peace negotiations. They have the power to end the killings, rapes, and other violent crimes that have been such a constant feature of the conflict. Foremost among them is the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, should the criminal case be suspended while the peace negotiations are ongoing. Just 2 weeks ago, the media reported that the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Sudan had flown one of the men indicted for war crimes by the ICC to a peace meeting. When UN officials were asked why they had agreed to use a UN helicopter to transport the criminal court fugitive to the peace negotiations, they said it was necessary to stop the violence and killings. Also in the headlines those past days is the political turmoil unfolding in Lebanon over the work of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. The Special Tribunal was set up to investigate the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. We would imagine that the entire country wants to know who is the perpetrator of this killing. However, the government has collapsed over disagreement about the work of the Special Tribunal, and this has sparked fears of violence in the country. These are two very recent examples of how peace and justice come head-to-head in conflict zones or other high-tension areas around the globe. Does this mean that we have to choose between peace and justice? Can peace and justice coexist? It is possible to have a sustainable peace without justice? These questions are fundamentally important to all of us. Looking on the bright side, the fact that there is now a genuine debate about the relationship between justice shows how far we have come. Throughout history, war crimes were committed with impunity. There were very few attempts to hold anyone accountable for violations of international humanitarian law and other international crimes. The parties to the conflict, often with the support of external actors protecting their own interests, controlled the mediations. Peace agreements were signed between the belligerents, often at the cost of blanket amnesties that ensured impunity for the massive crimes committed. The victims were left without redress. That began to change in the early 90s, first with the creation of the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. The link between peace and justice is embodied in the very creation of the ICTY. The Security Council established my tribunal under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter as a measure to restore peace and security to the region of former Yugoslavia. A series of other tribunals are working to end impunity for war crimes in The Hague and elsewhere. This includes the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and as I already mentioned, the ICC. Nowadays, international justice is not an academic notion, but a living, breathing concept that is very much on the agenda in peace negotiations. While there are undeniably tensions between peace and justice, in the short term, my message for you today is that we need not and must not choose one over the other. As international prosecutors, we believe that it is not possible to have lasting peace if the crimes of the past have not been addressed. Prioritizing peace over justice might seem expedient in the short term, but in the long run, a sustainable peace cannot be built upon the foundations of impunity. This truth, once again, became obvious to me a few months ago when I went to Srebrenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina and spent a day with survivors of the genocide that took place there in July 1995 in the middle of Europe. Many survivors told me their stories about what happened when the Bosnian Serb army took over the village and separated the men from the women. The women were forcibly removed from the enclave, while the men were put in brutal detention facilities. More than 7,000 men were then executed en masse over the next few days. One woman I met there, one of the responsible of the Mothers of Srebrenica, that's the name of the organization of the survivors. She lost 42 male members of her family, her father, her uncles, her brother, her sons. And she told me that since then, those crimes are dominating every day of her life, yesterday, today, and for sure also tomorrow. And when I asked her what she's expecting from us, from the international community, from you, she was very clear in saying that, of course, nobody can bring back my loved ones. But what we are expecting is justice. We want the perpetrators to face justice. And her words emphasize the importance of bringing those indicted for the Srebrenica crimes to trial. But yet today, one of the main alleged responsible, the General Ratko Mladic, is still at large, and we are still at the tribunal 15 years after our creation, asking the international community to do everything necessary to have this fugitive arrested. I'm convinced that a sustainable peace will only come to the Balkans through justice, and this includes, as I said, ensuring that Mladic and many others face the charges against them. Similarly, when I worked in Uganda, we again reached the conclusion